It was a quiet night in a small town, the kind of night where the air feels heavy, where even the crickets hesitate to break the silence. Inside his home, a man of faith sat alone, his Bible untouched on the table, his hands trembling. For years he had preached about love, trust, and forgiveness. He had stood before his congregation, speaking of devotion, of sacrifice, of the sacred bond between a husband and wife. He had built a life on these principles, built a church, a family, a marriage, a life that, to the outside world, seemed unwavering, unbreakable. But inside his chest, something was different that night. A weight, a feeling he couldn't quite name, but one that pressed against his ribs like a force he had never known. It wasn't doubt, it wasn't fear. It was something else. His wife had been distant lately, distracted. The way she spoke to him, the way she moved around the house. It had changed. At first he told himself it was nothing, a bad week, a stressful month. But then came the whispers. A neighbor mentioned something odd, a passing remark about a car parked outside his home at strange hours, a car that did not belong to him, a car that should not have been there. The pit in his stomach grew. Then there were the phone calls. She would step outside to take them, lowering her voice when he came near. When he asked who it was, she would smile, just a little too quickly, and say, "No one important." He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. But belief requires evidence, and all he had was doubt. Until one night, that changed. The moment was so ordinary, so unassuming. A misplaced phone left unattended on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a name he recognized, a name that made his blood run cold. Her brother. He hesitated. A brother calling his sister was nothing unusual. But the hour, the frequency, the way she snatched the phone from his hands the moment she saw him looking, that was different. Something inside him, something he had ignored for too long, snapped awake. That night, he did something he never thought he'd have to do. He waited until she was asleep. Then, with steady hands, he placed a small camera in the one place no man should ever feel the need to spy, his own bedroom. The next day, he left early for church. He preached as he always did, his voice steady, his words powerful. But beneath the surface, his heart was pounding. His mind was elsewhere. The clock ticked. The sermon ended. The congregation left. And then he went home. He walked through the front door, sat down at his desk, and opened his laptop. The footage loaded, his breath caught in his throat. There, in his bed, in the home they had built together, was his wife. But she was not alone. And the man with her was the last person in the world he expected. The betrayal was deeper than anything he could have imagined. The realization crushed him, suffocated him, twisted something inside him that had never been touched before. He could have confronted them, could have demanded answers, could have walked away. But he didn't. Instead, he sat in silence, his hands on the desk, his eyes fixed on the screen. And at that moment, something inside him shifted. A decision was made, a path was chosen. And what came next would shake an entire town to its core. It started with a feeling, the kind that creeps in slowly, settling deep in the back of the mind, refusing to leave. A quiet whisper at first, so easy to dismiss, so easy to ignore. But with time it grew louder, louder until it became impossible to silence. For years he had lived by faith, a man of God, a man of devotion. He stood before his congregation every Sunday, preaching the power of love, the strength of commitment, the sacred bond of marriage. He had built a home with his wife, shared laughter, shared prayers, shared a life that, from the outside, seemed perfect. But something was wrong. He saw it in the way she moved, quick glances over her shoulder when she thought no one was watching. In the way she spoke, words that once felt warm now edged with something distant, something cold. Late-night phone calls she claimed were nothing, whispers behind closed doors. And then there was the car, a car that shouldn't have been there. Neighbors mentioned it in passing, unaware of the storm they had set in motion. "Oh, I saw someone pull up last night. Thought it was you." A harmless comment, a small detail. But for him it was the first crack in the foundation of everything he believed to be true. Doubt settled in, and doubt, when left unchecked, has a way of growing. At first he told himself it was stress, a misunderstanding, his mind playing tricks on him. But then came the missed calls, the hurried excuses, the messages she deleted before he could see them. She had been growing distant for weeks, maybe months. But now it was undeniable. So one night, when she thought he was fast asleep, he made a decision. He waited, listened as she slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, watched as she took her phone and disappeared into the other room. The hushed conversation through the door was too faint to hear, but the way she whispered, the way her voice wavered, it was enough. He could have confronted her then. But he didn't. Instead, he did something he never imagined himself doing. The next morning, before he left for church, he placed a camera in their bedroom. A quiet, unshakable certainty told him he would find the truth there. And that night, when he finally sat down to watch the footage, he did. But the truth wasn't just painful. It wasn't just betrayal. It was something far worse, because the man in the video with his wife wasn't just some stranger. It was her own brother. The realization hit like a blow to the chest, knocking the breath from his lungs. The room around him blurred, the walls closing in. His heart pounded, but not from sadness, not from heartbreak. It was something else, something colder, something final. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't call her name. Instead, he sat there, motionless, staring at the screen. And when he finally moved, it wasn't to confront. It was to plan. Because the man who had spent his life preaching love, patience, and forgiveness was about to do something that would leave an entire town in fear. Tonight, we unravel a story that shook a community to its core. A respected pastor, a devoted husband, and a man whose faith was tested in the most unimaginable way. A single discovery in his own bedroom changed everything. What began as suspicion led to a revelation so shocking, so unthinkable, that it shattered not only his marriage, but something far deeper within him. And what happened next? It wasn't just revenge, it was a tragedy, a warning, a tale of betrayal, madness, and a darkness that no one saw coming. Was this a crime of passion? Or was there something more at play? And why was his wife hiding a secret so terrifying? Even her own family feared the truth. Stay with us as we uncover the horrifying details of a story that still haunts those who dare to remember. For over 2 decades, Pastor David Holloway stood at the pulpit of Grace Community Church, his voice echoing through the high ceilings, his words shaping the hearts and minds of his congregation. He was a man of unwavering faith, a pillar in the community, a mentor, a leader, and above all else, a devoted husband. He had built the church from the ground up, not just with bricks and mortar, but with patience, dedication, and love. His sermons were powerful, filled with wisdom, always pointing people toward righteousness. To those who knew him, Pastor Holloway was more than just a preacher. He was a man people looked up to, a man they trusted. At home, he was known as a loving husband to his wife, Angela. Their marriage was admired, partners in faith, partners in life. They had been together for nearly 15 years, raising their children, counseling couples, helping those in need. But behind closed doors, there were cracks in the foundation. At first they were small, barely noticeable, a missed dinner, a sudden change in schedule, conversations that ended too quickly when he entered the room. At first, he ignored it. After all, love is built on trust. But trust, once broken, has a way of never quite mending the same. Angela Holloway was the image of grace. She was beautiful, poised, always carrying herself with quiet confidence. To the church, she was the pastor's faithful wife, the perfect example of a devoted woman, always by his side, always leading Bible study, always seen smiling. But lately, that smile had changed. There was something different in her eyes, something distant. She had always been involved in the church, but her absences became more frequent. Late-night phone calls, moments of nervousness when he asked simple questions, a subtle but unmistakable change in the way she looked at him. And then there were the rumors. They started as whispers, a passing comment from a member of the congregation, a glance from a neighbor that lingered just a second too long. One person mentioned seeing Angela out late at night without her husband. Another saw a man leaving their home while Pastor Holloway was away. The pastor brushed it off. People talk. They always do. But then he heard a name he hadn't heard in years. Jacob Monroe had always been the family's black sheep. Growing up, he was trouble, a name constantly muttered in hushed conversations, run-ins with the law, a temper that made people uneasy, a man who, for years, had been kept at arm's length from the rest of the family. Then one day, out of nowhere, he reappeared. Angela introduced him to the church members as her long-lost brother. She said he had changed, that he was trying to rebuild his life. But the way he looked at her, something about it made people uncomfortable. His presence around the house became more frequent, more than a brother visiting his sister, more than a family reunion. The pastor noticed, neighbors noticed, and yet no one spoke. No one dared to say what they were really thinking. At first it was subtle, small things that wouldn't seem strange on their own but stacked together, formed a picture he didn't want to see. The late-night phone calls, the quick glances at her phone, the way she shielded the screen from his view, the excuses. "It's just an old friend from college. You're being paranoid. Why don't you trust me?" Trust. That word began to sound different every time she said it. Then came the sightings. One evening, while walking into the church, a neighbor stopped him. An older woman, one of the church elders, her face hesitant. "Pastor, I don't mean to pry, but I saw something the other night." "Saw what?" he asked, his chest tightening. "A man, coming out of your house while you were here. He left in a hurry." He forced a smile, a hollow reassurance that it must have been nothing. But inside, the words burrowed deep. That night when he came home, Angela wouldn't look him in the eye. Doubt turned into certainty. Certainty turned into a need for proof. And proof required patience. One morning before heading to the church, he made a decision. He went into their bedroom, moved the pillows just slightly, and placed a small camera inside the corner of the room, hidden. He had no plan for what would come next. No idea what he would do if his worst fears were confirmed. All he knew was that he needed to see it with his own eyes. And when he did, everything he thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, his family, would shatter beyond repair. The house was silent when he arrived. Too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't welcome you home, but warns you something is wrong. Pastor Holloway had driven back from the church earlier than usual, a last-minute decision he hadn't even told Angela about. He had spent the entire day wrestling with thoughts he couldn't escape, the lingering doubts, the whispers, the weight in his chest that refused to go away. And then there was the camera. He had set it up only the night before, but he didn't need to check the footage. Because as he stepped inside, as he walked down the hallway toward the bedroom, he already knew. He felt it. A wrongness in the air, a shift in the atmosphere. And then he heard it. Low voices, murmurs, a hushed laugh, intimate, familiar. too familiar. He reached for the doorknob. His palm was cold, his breathing shallow. For a split second he hesitated, because some part of him, some desperate, clinging part, hoped, prayed that he was wrong, that this was just paranoia, a misunderstanding, that when he opened the door he would find nothing. He turned the knob, and what he saw on the other side was beyond betrayal. The room was dimly lit, the only glow coming from the bedside lamp, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. The air was thick with perfume. Hers, the scent he had known for over a decade. But now it mixed with something else, something heavy, something suffocating. And then he saw them, two figures, entwined, the way her hands moved, the way she whispered his name. But it wasn't his name. And the man beside her, the one touching her, holding her, wasn't a stranger. It was him, her own brother. How long had this been going on? How long had she lied? How long had she looked him in the eyes every morning and told him she loved him, knowing this was happening behind his back? But no words came out. A sharp ringing filled his ears. His pulse pounded so loudly he almost didn't hear them gasp when they saw him standing there. Angela's eyes widened in shock. She scrambled, pulling the sheets around her like they could somehow erase what had just happened. Jacob sat frozen, his expression blank, like a man caught in a nightmare he never expected to face. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. The weight of what he had just witnessed pressed down on him, crushing his ribs, choking the air from his lungs. It wasn't just infidelity. It was something far worse, something unnatural, something unspeakable. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. For 15 years, he had devoted his life to this woman. He had built a home with her, shared secrets, shared vows, shared everything. And now none of it was real. His entire marriage had been a lie. His faith, the very foundation of his life, meant nothing. Angela took a step toward him, her mouth opening, but no words came out. What could she say? What excuse could exist for something like this? He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask her how long. How long had this been going on? How long had she lied? How long had she looked him in the eyes every morning and told him she loved him, knowing this was happening behind his back? But no words came out. Nothing. He just turned around, walked out of the room, walked out of the house, walked into the cold, empty night with a mind that no longer belonged to him, because something inside him had just... Pastor Holloway did not scream. He did not rage. He did not demand answers. Instead, he left. He walked out of the house, out into the night, into the cold air that bit at his skin, but couldn't numb what burned inside him. He drove to the church, sat in his office, stared at the wooden cross above his desk for what felt like hours, his mind an abyss of silence. Then, slowly, a thought took shape, a thought he should have dismissed, a thought no man of God should ever have. But he didn't push it away. He let it fester, grow. By morning, he had already decided. He would not forgive. He would not forget. Angela had taken everything from him, his trust, his dignity, his faith. And so he would take something from her, something far worse than she could ever imagine. The next day he acted normal. When Angela finally emerged from the bedroom, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen, he greeted her with a soft smile. "Morning, sweetheart." She froze. She stared at him like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. "I was thinking," he continued, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "It's been a while since we had your family over for dinner." Angela's lips parted slightly, her breath catching in her throat. "Your parents, your sisters, even Jacob. Let's have a little gathering." He took a sip of coffee, watching her from over the rim of the cup, watching the color drain from her face. "What do you think?" Her voice barely came out. I guess that sounds nice." He smiled. the kind of smile a man wears when he already knows the ending to the story. "Good," he said. "Let's make it special." The table was set. The smell of roasted meat and buttered vegetables filled the air. Candles flickered in the dimly lit dining room, casting long, wavering shadows across the faces of Angela's family. Laughter rang out. Plates clinked. Conversations overlapped. Stories were shared. To everyone else, it was just another family gathering. To him, it was something entirely else. He watched them, one by one, studied their faces, his wife's mother beaming as she spoke about an upcoming church fundraiser. Her father, swirling his glass of wine, chuckled at a joke her younger sister had made. And then there was Jacob, sitting directly across from him, eating, laughing, acting like a man who hadn't committed the ultimate betrayal. The pastor's fingers tightened around his knife. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting, waiting for the right moment. And then, as the laughter died down, he cleared his throat. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he said. His voice was warm, steady. "It's not often we get to sit together like this, as a family." Angela smiled, forcing herself to play along. "You're right," she said, lifting her glass. "To family." They all raised their glasses. The pastor did not. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table, and then he said it. "I know everything." The room fell silent. Angela froze, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Jacob stopped chewing, his jaw locking, the muscles in his face twitching. The air shifted. A slow, creeping unease slithered through the room, curling around every person at that table. Angela tried to keep her voice steady. "No." "What?" The pastor tilted his head, smiled. "You know exactly what." Jacob dropped his fork. It clattered against the plate, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Angela's breathing turned shallow. The pastor leaned back in his chair, reaching into his pocket. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out a small remote, clicked a button, and from the television behind them, the bedroom footage began to play. Angela's mother gasped, slapping a hand over her mouth. Her father's face twisted in horror. Jacob shot up from his chair. "Turn that off." The pastor moved first. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached for the key in his pocket and turned the lock on the dining room door. Click. "Sit down." For a moment, no one moved. The only sound in the room was the flickering television, the undeniable proof playing over and over again. Angela's mother let out a strangled sob. Her father's face twisted in revulsion. Jacob stood frozen, his entire body rigid, his knuckles white, as he gripped the edge of the table. Angela. She didn't even breathe. The pastor stared at them, his expression calm. Too calm. Then he spoke. "I took vows." His voice was quiet, measured. "For better or worse, in sickness and in health." His eyes flicked to Angela. "Tell me, wife, did you take those same vows?" Angela's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She didn't need to answer. They all knew the truth. A low chuckle rumbled from the pastor's chest. He shook his head. "You did this," he whispered. Then, before anyone could react, he moved. Fast, too fast. The first scream shattered the silence. By the time the neighbors heard the commotion, it was already too late. By the time the first call hit 911, the house had already fallen silent. By the time the police arrived, they weren't responding to a domestic dispute. They were responding to a massacre. Blood coated the dining room walls. Chairs lay overturned. Shattered glass glinted under the dim lights. Plates sat abandoned, meals half-eaten. The smell of roasted meat still hung in the air, but now it mixed with something else, something metallic, something warm, something unmistakable. 5 bodies were found: Angela, Jacob, her parents, her younger sister. None of them made it out alive. But the pastor? He was nowhere to be found. The first 911 call was frantic. "There's blood everywhere. Oh my God, send help." Officers arrived within minutes. The front door was unlocked. The house was silent. But on the dining room table, placed neatly beside the last untouched glass of wine, they found a note. Scrawled in ink, in handwriting steady as stone, were the final words of a man who had once preached forgiveness. "Vengeance is the Lord's, but tonight it was mine." And just like that, he was gone. The murder sent shockwaves through the town, but as police combed through the wreckage of that night, they uncovered something even darker. At first, the affair seemed like a clear-cut betrayal. A wife, a brother, an unforgivable sin. But buried beneath that simple narrative was a truth far more disturbing. Angela had secrets, ones she never wanted to surface. As detectives searched her personal belongings, they found a hidden compartment in her closet. Inside there were letters, old, worn, some crumpled as if they had been shoved away in a hurry. Each one written by Jacob, each one carrying a different tone, some pleading, some threatening. But one stood out. A single sheet of paper, the ink slightly smudged, dated years before the murders. "If you tell him what happened, you know what I'll do. You'll lose everything." The words sent a chill through the investigators. Was Angela a willing participant in the affair? Or had she been forced into silence, blackmailed, threatened, manipulated by someone who had controlled her for years? And if so, was the pastor really the only monster at that dinner table? The nationwide manhunt for Pastor Holloway lasted 4 days. 4 days of speculation, 4 days of whispers, 4 days of questions no one had answers to. And then they found him. His body was discovered in an abandoned church nearly 100 miles away. A single gunshot wound to the head, a Bible open beside him. And on the altar, one final note. "I was blind, but now I see." It seemed like a suicide, but some detectives weren't convinced. The position of the gun, the lack of gunpowder residue on his hands. Somewhere in the shadows there was another piece to this puzzle. Officially, the case was closed. The police ruled it a murder-suicide, a crime of passion that ended in bloodshed. But the town? The town still whispered. Some believed Angela had known more than she ever let on. Others insisted that the pastor wasn't the only one seeking revenge that night. And then there were those who pointed to Jacob's past, to the secrets buried beneath years of silence, to the people who might have wanted him gone just as badly as the pastor did. Maybe Holloway's final act of vengeance wasn't just about his wife. Maybe he wasn't the only one with blood on his hands. The case is closed, but the questions remain. Was this simply a crime of passion, or was something much darker at play? Did the pastor's revenge serve justice, or did he let his own demons consume him? And what about Angela? Was she truly unfaithful, or was she trapped in something she couldn't escape? Most chilling of all, did the pastor really take his own life, or was someone making sure the full truth never came to light? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe the pastor's revenge was justified? Was this truly about betrayal, or was there something more beneath the surface? What do you think really happened that night? If you found this case shocking, check out my deep dive on another true crime case, because sometimes the truth is even more disturbing than fiction. Don't forget to like this video if you want more cases like this, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss another chilling story. Because in the world of true crime, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. If this story left you questioning what's real and what's hidden beneath the surface, you won't believe what happened in another case video. The twists and turns in that case are even more chilling. Click here to watch it now. And if you're fascinated by the dark side of human nature, by the secrets people keep, and the lengths they'll go to hide them, don't forget to subscribe. I bring you new true crime stories every week, diving into the most shocking cases you've never heard of and uncovering the truths that were meant to stay buried. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that happen in real life. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep questioning everything.